I'd always known this day would come, but I never expected it to feel like this. My name is Evelyn. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent the better part of the last decade serving my country in the military. I never imagined my grandfather's death would pull me into a war zone of another kind, one where I would face off against the people who were supposed to have my back. I walked into the courtroom feeling the cold, sterile air hit my skin. The walls, the long table, the judge in her black robe, the gallery of people who didn't know a thing about me. Everything about this moment made me want to turn around and walk right out the door. But I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything they'd done. The seat next to me was empty. No one from my family had bothered to show up. They were all busy mocking me behind my back, my own parents and younger brother. As I looked around the room, I caught sight of my lawyer, a quiet, no-nonsense woman named Diane. She offered me a small, reassuring smile as I sat down beside her. Diane had been with me through the worst of it, the messy, paper-thin legalities that had become my life after my grandfather passed away. "Ready?" she asked in a hushed voice, as though she already knew the answer. I nodded without saying a word. Ready? I had been preparing for this moment for months. The only thing that was uncertain was how deep the betrayal would go. I could feel it in my bones, the way my family had been turning against me since the moment my grandfather's will was read. My younger brother Ryan sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, his eyes trained on me with an almost disgusted look on his face. Next to him were our parents, their expressions strained, rehearsed. They had always been quick to criticize me, to downplay my achievements, to tell me how selfish I was for choosing a military career instead of living a normal life. And now, here we were, fighting over my grandfather's estate. I wasn't even sure how it had gotten to this point, why it had taken so long for my family to turn on me. But then again, I should have known. I had always been the outsider. "Miss Ramirez," the judge's voice cut through the room, drawing me back into focus. "I understand you are submitting an additional document to the court?" Diane gave a brief nod and then passed over the document to the judge. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands were clammy, but I didn't dare let anyone see that. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge as she began to read the letter. As she skimmed the pages, Ryan and my parents exchanged glances, the tension in the air thick enough to cut through with a knife. I knew what they were thinking. They thought they had this in the bag. They thought they were the ones who were going to walk away with my grandfather's fortune. The same people who had always looked at my military service like it was some kind of waste of time. I wasn't about to let them win. The judge looked up from the letter, her gaze now fixed on my family. "It seems that Evelyn's grandfather left behind something quite different from what was originally understood." She cleared her throat. "This letter indicates that he intended for Evelyn to receive a greater portion of the estate, specifically due to her service to the country." The silence in the room was deafening. Ryan opened his mouth to say something, but the words died on his lips. My parents exchanged looks, their expressions wavering, the self-satisfied smirks they'd worn only moments ago now nowhere to be found. "Your grandfather," the judge continued, "appears to have made it clear that he wanted his granddaughter to benefit from his legacy, despite her absence from the family for much of the last decade." She paused. "This letter will be entered into evidence." I could feel my pulse quicken, and for the first time since I entered that room, I allowed myself a small smile. The tables had turned. My grandfather had always been the one person in my life who understood me, who never judged me for my choices. His letter, his final words, were about to expose the hypocrisy and greed that had always lived just beneath the surface of my family. The silence stretched on, and then Ryan's voice broke through the stillness. "This isn't fair," he said, the words dripping with venom. "You weren't even there for him. You weren't even part of our lives. And now you want everything?" I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. I had already won this battle, and he was too blind to see it. I stood up, my voice steady and calm. "No, Ryan, I don't want everything. But I am entitled to what he intended for me, and I've earned it despite all of you." The room was still, but I could feel my family's contempt burning into me, their resentment thickening the air. But I was ready for this fight. I had always been ready. The battle for my grandfather's legacy had begun, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. Not now. Not ever. This was just the beginning. I don't know what I was expecting when I returned to my hometown, but it definitely wasn't this. My name is Evelyn, 35 years old, a decorated military officer. I'd been back home only a handful of times since I enlisted, but after my grandfather passed, I knew I had to come back. I wasn't expecting any fanfare, any grand welcome, but something inside me still hoped I'd get a little recognition, maybe some acknowledgement that I was, in fact, part of this family. The funeral was simple, just as my grandfather would have wanted. He never was the kind of man who cared for extravagance. But that didn't mean I didn't want to be there for him, to give him a send-off that felt right, even if that meant showing up alone. I arrived early, just before the service started, walking into the church with the weight of everything I'd been carrying: the anger, the betrayal, the silent years that had passed since I'd last seen most of these people. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing full well that my family had no use for me anymore. I was wrong. When I walked inside, no one greeted me. Not a single soul even acknowledged I was there. I wasn't expecting hugs or warm embraces, but I thought at the very least someone would look my way. Nothing, not even my parents, who sat front and center, like they had never missed a moment to criticize me when I was growing up. It was like I was invisible. I stood there for a moment, just inside the door, my hands gripping the edges of my coat, feeling like an intruder in my own family's space. I took a breath, ready to just sit down, but the moment I looked toward the front of the church, I realized they hadn't even saved me a seat. My family was already seated, the pews full except for one small section at the very back. The service started. I could hear the low murmur of voices, the rustling of papers, but all I felt was a strange numbness. No one made space for me. No one even acknowledged my presence. Not even my younger brother, Ryan, who used to be close to me when we were kids. As the priest spoke, I couldn't focus. My mind was elsewhere, on the way my family had erased me. Not just now, but over the years. No one reached out to me after my deployments. No one cared enough to ask how I was doing. Every attempt to reconnect with them had been met with dismissal, like I was a burden they didn't need. So I stopped trying. But now, at my grandfather's funeral, it was like I was a ghost. After the service, the funeral procession moved to the cemetery. I thought about leaving, just walking away. But there was a part of me, deep down, that still wanted something. An acknowledgement, a small recognition, that I had mattered in this family once. When we arrived at the gravesite, I lingered near the back of the crowd, standing off to the side, out of the way. I couldn't bring myself to walk closer. Every time I tried, I felt like I was being pushed further into the shadows, farther from the family I had fought so hard to belong to. The final words were spoken. The dirt was piled onto the grave. The ceremony ended, but no one approached me. No one said a word. And just like that, my grandfather was gone, and I was once again alone. I watched as the others slowly began to trickle away, heading toward their cars, their groups of people, their family. I stood there for a long time, my feet planted firmly in the grass, wondering when it all started to feel like this, like I didn't belong. It wasn't until everyone had left that I saw my mother and father walking toward their car. They didn't look at me, not once. They were too busy whispering to each other, probably about me, about how I'd never fit in with them, how I was the child they never expected, the one who didn't follow their rules. But then, in the distance, I saw Ryan. He was walking away from the crowd toward the exit. His back was to me, and I could see him stiffen like he knew I was there. He stopped walking for a moment, then turned back to glance in my direction. I don't know why I thought he would stop, why I thought he would walk toward me and offer some kind of peace, some kind of connection after all these years. But he didn't. He just looked at me for a second, his face unreadable, then turned away and walked to the car with my parents. Not a single word was exchanged. I stood there feeling like the entire weight of the past 10 years had just hit me all at once. I was forgotten. I had fought for this family in so many ways, through deployments, through silence, through years of unanswered calls and texts. And yet when the moment came, I wasn't even given the chance to be remembered. I don't know how long I stood there after that, but when I finally turned to leave, I felt a shift. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I'd been before. I wasn't looking for a fight, I was just done. And then it hit me. The realization that my grandfather's legacy wasn't tied to these people. His legacy wasn't about them. It was about me, about what I could do with the life he left behind without them. I didn't need their approval. I never had. I had spent my whole life trying to earn something from them: validation, recognition, even love. But now, as I walked away from the gravesite, I realized I didn't need any of that. I had what mattered: my grandfather's legacy and the strength to stand on my own. I was finally free. The air in my apartment felt thicker than usual as I sat at my desk. The evidence of my family's betrayal strewn across the surface. Papers, legal documents, receipts. I hadn't planned on coming back home after the funeral, but something had clicked inside me during the drive back. It wasn't just the cold, stifling silence at the cemetery or the way my family had erased me. It was the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me something wasn't right with the will. Something was off. I had to find out the truth. I pulled up the digital copy of my grandfather's will. It was clear to me now that my family had been planning this for months. The way they'd turned everything around, how my brother Ryan had suddenly become so eager to manage my grandfather's estate. It had all been too quick, too easy. My grandfather, a man who had always kept his affairs tight-knit, wouldn't have made such a huge, careless mistake. And yet, here I was, about to uncover exactly what had happened. I wasn't a lawyer, but my military training had taught me to sift through information methodically. There were patterns, discrepancies, things I'd learned to spot through years of sorting intelligence. The first thing I noticed was the date. The will was dated only a month before my grandfather died, but I remembered him clearly stating to me, years ago, that he'd updated his will regularly. I scanned through the document again, looking for anything that didn't fit. The language was too formal, too rigid. The clauses didn't seem like my grandfather's voice. It was all too neat, too orderly. Then I found it. The signature. My grandfather's signature had always been a little shaky, but this one was too perfect, too precise. I zoomed in on the corner of the document where it had been placed, and my gut clenched. It was unmistakable. It had been forged. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They had done it. My parents and Ryan had forged my grandfather's will, making sure I was left out. They had manipulated the system, knowing I was too far away, too entrenched in my service to fight them. They had never expected me to come back. I had trusted them. I had spent my life believing that, despite the distance, family meant something. But this was the final straw. They hadn't just taken my inheritance. They had stolen my grandfather's legacy. And worse, they had lied, manipulated, and forged documents to keep me out of it. I grabbed my phone and called Diane, my lawyer. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before she answered. "Evelyn, what's going on?" "I need you to look at something," I said, my voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "I think they forged the will." There was a brief pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" "I mean they forged it," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I need you to look at the documents. I can't do this alone." "I'll be right there," Diane said without hesitation. "I'm on my way." I hung up and ran my hands through my hair, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. This was bigger than that. My grandfather had trusted me, and now I had to fight for what was right. For him. A few hours later, Diane arrived, her briefcase in hand. She didn't waste any time. She sat down across from me, immediately pulling the will up on her laptop. As she scrolled through, I could see her eyes narrowing, her brow furrowing in concentration. I knew she was seeing it now, the inconsistencies, the perfect signature that wasn't my grandfather's. "This doesn't look right," Diane said, her voice steady but serious. "I can't say for sure without further investigation, but the signature, it's been forged, Evelyn. The timing of this, the changes in the document, it all smells like fraud." I nodded, my jaw clenched. I knew it. I could feel it. "They've been planning this." Diane's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she quickly began pulling up a list of the estate's assets, cross-referencing the documents. "We're going to need forensic evidence," she said after a moment, her tone suddenly more businesslike. "We'll need to prove that the signature isn't your grandfather's and that the changes were made after his death. But I can help with that. We can make this right." I exhaled slowly, feeling a tiny flicker of hope. "Do we have enough?" Diane didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the papers, her fingers tapping the keys. Finally, she looked up. "We will." I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the principle of it all, the truth. My family had manipulated me for years, used me, and I had let them. But now I wasn't backing down. Diane put the documents aside and looked at me, her eyes sharp with determination. "Evelyn, we'll fight this. But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. They won't go down without a fight." I looked at the documents, at the papers that had stolen everything from me. everything that belonged to my grandfather. It wasn't just about proving they were wrong, it was about making sure they never did this again. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Good, Diane replied. Let's get to work. And so we did. Every document, every email, every receipt that I could find, it all went into my plan. I started collecting evidence of every conversation with my family, every instance when they had tried to manipulate or deceive me. Every lie would be exposed. This wasn't just about justice. It was about making sure that my grandfather's memory wasn't tarnished by the people I had once trusted. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. It was time to make them pay. The day had come, the moment I had been building toward for weeks. I sat in the same office, the same sterile room where I had first learned that my family had conspired against me. And now I was about to confront them. Ryan, my parents, and their lawyer were seated across from me, their faces hard as stone. I didn't care. Not anymore. Diane sat beside me, her quiet confidence radiating in the small, tense space. I was ready for this, even if they weren't. I had been preparing for this moment since the will was read, the deception, the lies, the betrayal, and now it was time to bring it all into the light. Ryan looked at me like I had just walked into a battlefield, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. My parents didn't look at me. They avoided my gaze like they were ashamed of me, something I had never felt before. Their lawyer, a slick man in his late 50s named James, adjusted his glasses, looking down at the papers in front of him as if he were the one in control. He cleared his throat before speaking. Miss Ramirez, he began, his voice smooth, practiced, we're here today to resolve this matter, and I'm sure reach an amicable solution. Your family has been very generous, and I believe we can come to an agreement that benefits everyone. I didn't respond right away. I let the words hang in the air for a beat, knowing full well how empty they were. Amicable solution? That ship had sailed the moment they'd forged my grandfather's will. You can drop the act, James, I said, my voice calm but firm. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. There's no solution to this. My family tried to steal from me, tried to erase me from everything that belonged to my grandfather, and now we're going to set it right. James raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by my bluntness. But I didn't care. The time for dancing around the truth was over. I pulled a thick file from my bag, the documents inside it arranged neatly. They were ready. Everything I needed to prove my case, the forged signature, the discrepancies in the will, the correspondence between their lawyer and mine, all of it. I slid the file across the table and pushed it toward them. Ryan's eyes flickered to the file, but he didn't reach for it. He just stared at me, his jaw tight. You think this is going to solve anything? You think the family will just give you everything because you found a piece of paper that doesn't have Grandpa's signature? I was about to respond, but Diane spoke first, her tone cutting through the tension like a knife. What she's found, she said, glancing at the file, is enough to prove that the will was forged. And I have experts ready to testify that the signature on that document is not Mr. Ramirez's. The truth is clear. Your family attempted to manipulate the estate, and Evelyn's grandfather's true wishes will be honored. For the first time, Ryan looked uncertain. His eyes darted to my parents, then back to me. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he just looked at the lawyer, his eyes pleading, like he was hoping James could make this all go away. But James, for all his legal jargon, didn't have a leg to stand on. The evidence was in front of them, laid bare, and the reality was starting to set in. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally speaking for the first time. Evelyn, you don't understand, she said, her voice shaking but trying to sound composed. We didn't mean for things to go this far. We thought if we just took control for once, it would all work out. I felt a flicker of disgust, but I held it in. I had to stay calm, had to remain in control. No, Mom, you didn't think at all. You saw a chance to take everything, and you did whatever it took to get it. The truth is, you've been using me for years, and I've let you. I thought maybe one day you'd see me as more than just your personal ATM, but I see now I was wrong. My father's head snapped up at the mention of the word ATM. He glared at me, his face turning red. Don't you dare turn this around on us, he spat. You've always had everything, Evelyn. We've sacrificed for you. Your mother and I, we gave you the world. And this is how you repay us? I shook my head, biting back the urge to yell. The truth was clearer than ever now. They didn't care about me, not really. They cared about what I could give them, and when I stopped providing, I became the enemy. I didn't ask for anything from you, I said quietly. I did it because I thought you needed help. I thought I was part of this family, but I wasn't. I was just a tool to you. Ryan's eyes dropped to the table, and I knew it was finally sinking in. But it was too late for him, too. I had given him every chance, every opportunity to be honest with me, to step up and do the right thing. But he chose sides. He chose their side. You don't get it, Ryan muttered under his breath. You just don't get it. We were trying to fix things, to make it right. You don't know what it's like to feel like you don't belong. I stared at him, my heart heavy but resolute. No, Ryan, you don't get it. You didn't have to fight for anything. You've always been the golden child, the one who never had to do a damn thing to earn anything. I fought for this family. I fought for you for years, and now I'm fighting to make sure you don't get away with this. James, sensing the shift in the room, straightened in his chair. This is getting out of hand. We're prepared to settle this with the courts. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. There will be no settlement. There will be no quiet resolution. I'm going to fight for what's mine, for what my grandfather wanted. And if that means I have to tear this family apart to do it, then so be it. The room was silent for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on everyone. My family had made their move, and now it was time for me to make mine. Take a good look at those documents, I said, my voice unwavering. Because you've lost. And no matter what you do next, I'm not backing down. I'm taking everything back. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. Diane did the same, gathering the papers and preparing to leave. But as I turned toward the door, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality, like a weight lifting from my shoulders. This was the end of something, the end of the family I thought I had. But it was also the beginning of something new. A family built on honesty, on respect. A family that would never betray me again. As I walked out of that room, I knew it was over. The battle was won, and no one, not even my family, could take that from me. The weight of the confrontation still lingered as I walked out of the courthouse, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I had just laid bare my family's deceit, exposing the lies they had tried to cover up for so long. But even with the victory, the emptiness in my chest remained. I had won, yes, but at what cost? I walked to my car, my mind still racing. The betrayal stung, sharper than ever. I hadn't expected them to go so far, to tear apart the very foundation of our family. But what hurt the most was realizing that I had been fighting alone for so long. That was when I heard the familiar voice call my name. Evelyn. I turned to see General Linda Brooks walking toward me. She was a woman I respected deeply, my former commanding officer during my time in the military. I hadn't seen her in years, but she had always been a constant in my life. I hadn't expected to run into her today, but there she was, her stride purposeful and her presence as commanding as ever. General, I said, surprised but glad to see a familiar face. What are you doing here? She smiled, but it was a knowing smile, one that told me she already knew the weight I was carrying. I could ask you the same thing, she said, her voice low but steady. I heard about the case. I came to see if there was anything I could do to help. I shook my head. I've been dealing with it on my own. She raised an eyebrow. That's what I figured. But Evelyn, you don't have to do this alone. I looked at her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and frustration. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for my family to betray me. You didn't have a choice in how they treated you, she said, her voice firm but compassionate. But you do have a choice in how you move forward, and you don't have to carry this burden by yourself. I let out a shaky breath, the exhaustion catching up to me. I don't know where to start. I'm not even sure if I can trust anyone anymore. Linda placed a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it grounding me. You start by trusting yourself, Evelyn. You've already been through hell, and you've come out the other side stronger. You're not alone in this fight. You've got allies. Allies? I repeated, her words hanging in the air. Who? She smiled again, her eyes warm. You've got me. You've always had me. And I think it's about time you realize that. I blinked, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. I didn't think you'd want to get involved in all this. Linda laughed softly. You forget that I've been in my fair share of battles, both on and off the field. This family of yours, they don't know what they're up against. But I do, and I can help you make sure the truth gets out. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel so alone. "You'd do that? Help me?" "Of course," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've seen what you've done for others in the military, Evelyn. I know your integrity, your strength, and I can't stand seeing people take advantage of that. You don't have to go through this fight by yourself." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing as I realized just how much this moment meant. I had been so focused on the betrayal, on the hurt that my family had caused, that I had forgotten there were people who cared about me, who would stand by me. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice thick. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied with a chuckle. "We've got work to do. You've already done the hardest part by standing up to them. Now it's time to make sure they can't get away with it." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination rise within me. "I'm ready." Linda leaned in, lowering her voice slightly. "We'll start by looking at everything. We'll get the forensic evidence you need, and I'll make sure the right people see it. We'll expose them, Evelyn. All of them. And when it's over, they'll know they can't mess with you or anyone else again." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't just about fighting for what was right. Maybe it was also about finding people who still believed in me, in my strength, in my ability to push through. And as I looked at Linda, standing beside me, I realized that this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. The courtroom was silent as I stood, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The polished wood, the cool, indifferent walls. The setting felt foreign, but the stakes were very real. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about proving my family's deception. It was about restoring my grandfather's legacy, ensuring his wishes were honored, and taking back what was rightfully mine. I glanced at Diane, who stood beside me, ready to present the evidence. She had been my rock throughout this process, but today was different. Today, we were on the edge of a real breakthrough. I could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation before the storm. My family sat across from me, still confident, still blind to the fact that their world was about to come crashing down. Ryan, my parents, and their lawyer, James, sat in their usual positions. James, the slick lawyer who had thought he could outsmart me, sat with a smug expression, flipping through his notes as though he had already won. My family sat stiffly, their eyes darting between the documents they had no idea how to interpret, and me. Their faces were tight, pretending they hadn't already started losing. "Miss Ramirez," the judge called out, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife, "it's time to present your evidence." I took a steadying breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. My family's betrayal would no longer be a quiet secret. It was time for the truth to come to light. Diane stood first, moving with precision as she laid the documents on the table in front of the judge. "Your Honor, what we have here are the original documents, as well as forensic evidence that proves the will in question was forged. The signature on the will does not belong to Mr. Ramirez. In addition, we have evidence that this fraudulent document was submitted after his death, which violates the terms of his estate." The room was quiet for a moment as the judge sifted through the papers, her eyes scanning the documents carefully. I could see her lips pressing together as she took in the facts, the weight of the evidence beginning to settle in. Diane had done her job perfectly, and now all I had to do was stand my ground. "How do you respond to these allegations?" the judge asked, turning her gaze to James, who looked unprepared for the sudden onslaught. James cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, while I acknowledge there are discrepancies, we maintain that the will was valid. There was no malicious intent involved, and these documents are, at best, speculative." He turned toward me, his eyes cold. "Miss Ramirez's service record does not give her any special right to the estate. She abandoned her family for years, and it is clear that her relationship with Mr. Ramirez was distant." The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I had heard them before, over and over for years. My military career had always been an easy target for them, a way to dismiss my value as a person, to call me distant or neglectful. But this time, I wasn't backing down. This time, I was prepared to stand up for everything I had worked for. "The only thing I abandoned," I said, my voice steady but firm, "was the idea that my family would ever value me for anything other than what I could give them. I've always been there for them, even when they treated me like I was invisible." I turned to the judge, not breaking my gaze. "I didn't abandon my grandfather. He was the one person who saw me for who I truly am, not just for what I could provide. This estate is rightfully mine. and I'm here today to make sure my grandfather's wishes are respected, not distorted by greed. James scoffed, his eyes narrowing. You don't get to rewrite history just because you want to. Your grandfather's wishes were clear. I didn't look at him as I responded. No, your manipulation was clear. And it ends today. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly noting the tension in the room. Enough, she said, her voice sharp. I've heard enough. Miss Ramirez, I'll take this into consideration. You've presented compelling evidence. Mr. James, I suggest you take a look at the facts before we proceed any further. James opened his mouth to say something, but the judge cut him off. Your objections are noted, but unless you have solid evidence to disprove Miss Ramirez's claims, this case will proceed in her favor. My family's faces drained of color. I could see the reality dawning on them, the realization that they had underestimated me, that they had underestimated my resolve. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and I couldn't help but wonder if he had finally understood the gravity of the situation. My parents avoided my eyes, their guilt now hanging in the air like a cloud. Your Honor, Diane said, we also have a letter from Mr. Ramirez which clearly states his intentions for the estate. I submit it as further evidence. She handed the judge the letter, and the room fell silent as the judge read through it. The air felt heavier with every passing second. When she finished, the judge looked up at my family. It seems Mr. Ramirez's intentions were far clearer than anyone here would like to admit, she said, her voice now firm. Given the evidence, I'm prepared to rule in Miss Ramirez's favor. The forged will be dismissed and the estate will be distributed as Mr. Ramirez originally intended. My family sat frozen. James's face was a mixture of disbelief and anger. Ryan, on the other hand, looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to argue, but no words came out. The judge glanced around the room. This case is now concluded. I will instruct the necessary parties to proceed with the correction of the estate. I suggest the family members involved seek legal advice regarding the consequences of their actions. And with that, the gavel came down. It was over. I stood there, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. I could feel the relief sweeping over me, but it wasn't triumph I felt. It was a quiet clarity. My grandfather's legacy would be honored. The truth had come out. As I turned to leave the courtroom, I felt Diane's reassuring presence beside me. I had done it. But as I glanced back one last time at my family, I felt a flicker of something more. It wasn't anger. It was finality. I had fought for what was right, for what had always been mine, and I was done. The door behind me closed with a finality that left no room for doubt. It was time to move on. The ruling came down in my favor, just as I'd hoped. The judge's decision was clear. The forged will was invalid, and the estate would be divided according to my grandfather's true wishes. My inheritance was secured, and my family's deceit was exposed for the world to see. But in the days that followed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. I had spent my whole life yearning for approval, for acceptance from my family. And now, with the estate settled and the battle won, I realized that nothing had changed. The truth had been laid bare, but the relationships, the years of silence and hurt, couldn't be undone. I stood at my kitchen counter, staring at the letter from my mother. It was the last piece of correspondence I'd received from her, tucked in between the piles of legal papers and documents I had been forced to go through during the case. I hadn't opened it right away. The thought of reading her words, after everything, left a bitter taste in my mouth. But now, it was time. I unfolded the letter slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Dear Evelyn, I know you must be angry, and I understand that. We've done things in the past that I wish I could take back. But I want you to know that your father and I are sorry for the way things turned out. We never meant to hurt you. The family has been through so much, and we're just doing our best to cope. I know it may be too late, but please know that I love you. I've always loved you. Please let me know if you'd like to talk. I know we can't undo the past, but maybe we can find a way to move forward. Love, Mom. I stared at the letter for a long time, the words sinking in slowly. The apology, though too late, was still an apology, but something inside me hardened. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. I knew I should have felt relief, but I didn't. The inheritance was mine, the legacy restored, but the emotional cost had been too high. My family had taken advantage of me, used me, and now, after all the years of trying to be part of their world, I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough for them. The apology felt like a formality, like a last-ditch effort to salvage something that could never be fixed. I set the letter down and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly, and for a moment I just stood there, trying to process everything. The legal battle had been hard, but this was harder. Letting go of the hope that they would ever truly see me, that they would ever be the family I wanted them to be. It hurt more than any court ruling ever could. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, scrolling through the messages. The ones I hadn't answered, the ones from my family, especially Ryan, who had tried to reach out. I saw the texts from him, each one more desperate than the last, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. The truth was, I didn't know what to say to him anymore. Mom says we need to talk, Evelyn. This isn't the end. Please come home. I set my phone down and ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't going back, not to that version of my family, the one where love came with conditions, where every action was measured by what I could give. I wasn't their ATM anymore, and I wasn't going to be their emotional punching bag either. A few days later, I made a decision. The inheritance money would be used for something good, something that had meaning. I set up a foundation in my grandfather's name, one that would help military families in need. It wasn't just about the money. It was about honoring the man who had never judged me, who had seen me for who I truly was. The phone rang as I was finalizing the paperwork for the foundation, and I answered it without looking at the screen. Evelyn? It was Diane, her voice calm but with a sense of urgency. The estate is officially settled. I just wanted to check in and see how you're holding up. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window again. I'm fine. I'm moving forward. There was a long pause on the other end. You know, it's okay if you're not fine. You've been through a lot, but you don't have to carry all of it alone. I smiled softly, appreciating her words. Diane had been more than just my lawyer. She had been a friend when I had no one else. And now she was right. I didn't have to carry it all by myself. I know, I said quietly. It's just, I thought winning would feel different. It's not about the victory, she replied. It's about what you do next. You've already done the hard part, fighting for what's right. Now, it's time to honor that fight by building something meaningful. That's the legacy you should be focused on. I paused, taking in her words. She was right. The court case was over. The betrayal laid bare. But the rest of my life? That was still ahead of me. I'm starting a foundation, I said, a hint of pride in my voice. For military families? It's what Grandpa would have wanted. Diane chuckled softly. That sounds perfect. You've got a long road ahead, but you're on the right path. I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't expected. For the first time, I felt like I was truly moving forward, not just physically, but emotionally. The past was still there, but it didn't have to define me anymore. The foundation would be my focus now, helping others, building a legacy of my own. I didn't need my family's approval to do that. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of everything finally lifting. The betrayal, the hurt, the disappointment, they would always be a part of me. But they didn't have to control me anymore. I had my grandfather's legacy, my integrity, and the strength to move on. That was enough. And as I looked at the empty space in my life, the place where my family used to be, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. It was time to write my own story, and this time it would be mine alone.